All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Murox ASP.NET 4.6 with C# 2015 6th edition, and we're in the last chapter right now, and we're in the middle of Chapter 25, and now we're going to talk about models. So Figure 25-6 on pages 876 and 877 talk about how to create a model. So again, a model contains the code that deals with data. What you see on your screen right now is the expanded models folder for the shopping cart application. You'll notice that it has a data folder that contains an entity data model created with the entity data framework. The data access class could have also just been done using C# code. Now that's one of the things that I've noticed, all right, that what you can do, I'm not saying this is what you should do, but what you can do with MVC applications is you can set them up in many ways. One way you could set them up is in the traditional way, when you still have a database and you've got your model code. Or you could set it up like it says there with the entity framework, or you could set it up just in code and not even really use a database. All right? The models folder has a view models folder that contains several view model files. Some of the files here were generated by the MVC template, and some were new files that were added for the shopping cart. The model for the application, actually the model for any MVC application has three main tasks. First, it gets and it updates the data in the data store. So it does any inserts, any updates, any deletes that have to be done to the underlying data. Second, it applies the business rules to the data. What are business rules? All right, and I've talked about this earlier. If you've got a company that is a for-profit company, your business rules are literally things like you provide a service, somebody pays for the service. All right, and they're all things that make the business run. Third, it applies validation rules to the data. Okay, so it might be something as simple as, well, our online store is open 24/7, but our physical store is open from 8 a.m. until 9 p.m. type of an idea. Because a model can do so much, these model files can get large. In that case, it's a good idea to break the files into smaller areas of responsibility. For example, in the example that's shown here, you could move the data access method to a separate file called cartdata.cs in the data folder. The model files themselves are regular class files that use regular C# code. In fact, most of the code in the cart model is similar to the data access code we've seen in the web versions of the shopping cart application in earlier chapters back in the database section. The view model files that are in the view models folder, they're what are known as lightweight objects. In other words, they're used to transfer data to the view. They're not required, but they're often seen when you are working with model view controller type of applications. The reason is they make many of the MVC tasks easier. Now keep in mind that you don't need to have a one-to-one relationship between models and view models. In other words, you might have a model that has no view models. All right. You might have, a model that has a view model. You also don't need a one-to-one relationship between the models or view models and the pages in the application. For example, there's a products view, but there isn't a products page. All right. You set up the model files in a way that makes sense for the data you're working with. This is done by practice, look and feel, etc. In the application we have here, both the cart page and the order page work with products. So it makes sense to have a products view model that can be sent to their respective views. On the other hand, the Contact Us page doesn't change over time, so the application doesn't keep any data for the Contact Us page in the data store. Rather, it hard codes the data in a view model that contains only read-only properties like email and phone. Because there's no need to retrieve contact data from a data store, there's no need in this case for a contact model. And again, you right mouse click on the models folder, you choose Add Class, and that's how you add a new item to the dialog box. Next, on pages 878 and 879 are figure 25-7, which goes over how to create a controller. Remember, application, then model, then controller, then view, then model, then controller, then view, then model, then controller, then view, for all you need to put in your application. So the application is done once. That's step 1. Steps 2, 3, and 4, model, controller, view, are done as many times as are necessary. So the controller contains the code that handles the HTTP requests from the browser. What you see in the figure here, and it's also replicated on page 879 in the book, is the controllers folder for the shopping cart MVC app. All right, if we wanted to add a new controller to it, we would right mouse click. I guess the controllers folder is not shown here. Here we've right mouse clicked on that folder. All right, we're able to add a new file. The MVC framework expects the controller to be named in a specific way. It should start with a name you want to appear in a URL, like home or cart or whatever, but it must, or really at least should, end with controller. I think there's ways around that you can reroute, but there's no reason really to do that. If you follow the naming conventions, your controllers will be automatically hooked up with default routes, as shown here. So the account controller will go to the account page, the cart controller to the cart page, the home controller to the home or index page, the manage controller to the manage page, the order controller to the order page, etc. A controller has 3 main tasks when it receives an HTTP request. First, it identifies the type of request that it received. Was it a GET? Was it a POST, for example? Second, it gets the data needed for the request. Third, it sends the data to the appropriate view. Remember, the controller is the traffic cop or the go-between. So when the URL comes in from the user, it goes to the controller that sends it off to the data store, to the model, I should say, to get the data it needs from the model in the data store that gets returned to the controller, that gets sent to the view, so that this original HTTP request that the controller answered will go back as an HTTP response through the view. So third, the controller sends the data to the appropriate view. The controller accomplishes these tasks with what are called action methods. For instance, the home controller in the figure here contains 2 action methods, index and content. And I guess it's really not shown here. Each of these methods handles GET requests. The index method loads the hard-coded data, and the contact method gets the data from the view model. Action methods are regular class methods that return objects that are derived from the action result base class. For example, index and contact return view result objects. The MVC framework knows that an action method that returns a view result is going to need to send data to a view. Okay? So the framework uses the data in these objects to do the appropriate action. Now note, as mentioned toward the bottom of page 878, you do not have to have a controller for every page. For example, in the shopping cart, there are 4 pages, but there are only 3 controllers. That's because the home controller handles requests for both the home page and the contact page. It's also common to have two action methods in a controller with the same name, such as two index action methods. When this happens, you need to add an action method selector attribute like HTTP GET or HTTP POST to each method to help the controller know which action method to use when the page loads for the first time and which one to use when the page posts back. It's kind of similar to the is-post-back test in a web form. Lastly, as mentioned on the bottom of page 878, it's important to know that controllers are only in charge of coordinating and transferring. They should never apply any business rules or validation logic. That's the job of the model. All right, they should never do any formatting of the data. That's the view. A common phrase to keep this in mind is you should have fat models but skinny controllers. Controllers pass data to a view using what's called either the view data or the view bag object with the view method. And as far as the view, and this is what's shown on pages 880 and 881 in the book. All right? And on pages 880 and 881 in the book, they mention that a view contains the HTML and Razor code that creates the user interface for the page. The figure that you see here, which is also on page 881 in the book, shows the expanded views folder for the shopping cart MVC app and how you can add a new view to it. The view files in the account and manage folder were generated automatically by the template and they haven't been changed. The view files in the home folder were also generated by the template, but they've been modified for the app. The about view file has been deleted. The order and cart folders and the view files they contain were added using the method described in this figure. Now, every action method in a controller that calls the view method needs to have a corresponding view. The model view controller framework expects these views to be in a folder with the same name as the first part of the controller, and the view is associated with it. It should also have the same name as the action method it's associated with. When you create a view, you can create what are called either regular views or strongly typed views. Strongly typed views let you take advantage of IntelliSense when you work with data sent from a controller. We'll talk about those in the next video. You can also choose different templates or create a partial view. Neither one of these is covered in here, all right? But there's more under the Microsoft Developer Network documentation. So again, you need to create a view for each controller action method that calls the view method. If you name the view correctly and you put it in the right folder, the Model View Controller framework will automatically hook that view up with its associated action method. If you use the procedure that's shown here to create the view, Visual Studio takes care of naming and placement for you. Now, what's discussed next is how to work with views. All right? And in particular, how to work with layout views, and then it gets into how to work with regular views and how to work with strongly typed views. That is the next 6 pages. So we will do that in the next presentation or video.